welcome to our first translation exercise in Hebrew. I will walk you through a bit of this process this first time, and hopefully you all can meet and talk with one another online about this too. You know, collaborative translation exercises are fantastic and a good way to be able to talk about these issues with other folks. Of course, you can work on these together in your small group meetings with the preceptors, the teaching team. So all of those are wonderful. I want to point out that pages 79 and 80 in your Learning Biblical Hebrew workbook include some introductory information, which is helpful. It's good to look over that before you start. On page 80, there's a little sample of how to complete the translations. And there's some good information here. For example, the vocabulary at the beginning of every one of these translations includes all of the roots that are for high-frequency words. So these lists build on one another, so you got to remember the words for next time, but also know that there is a lexicon in the back of this Learning Biblical Hebrew workbook that includes all of these words. It starts on page 283. It's called the glossary. So it's the dictionary you can use for translation assignments. If you don't know what a word means, you can look it up. But for now, they're telling you what most of these words mean. There are a couple of categories of words that they will help you with. Some low-frequency roots that just are rare words that don't occur much in Hebrew, but that happen to occur in this story. They'll just give you the name. They'll give you the word, right? They'll just tell you what it is. And they're also PN, which means proper noun. So I'll show you an example right here, proper noun. They're just giving that to you, and they're telling you that's the name of someone. So sound it out and see if you can guess who that is. Here's a proper noun that they're going to give you right here at the beginning of the second verse. V'Yosef, that's Joseph. And in this first verse, if we start right here, we have two proper names that they're giving you, so you can reuse that every time you come upon that name. So we're going to take a look here on page 80. You can see there's step 1, step 2, step 3 on how to complete translations. Right before that, it says, you have to allow yourself space to make mistakes and seek to understand what you missed. So it's okay to make mistakes. We are all going to do that in translation. I do that in translations all the time. Don't get upset with yourself for having a hard time. Be amazed at yourself for being able to translate any Hebrew at all. It is amazing what you're doing. Remember that. The second thing is, when you complete your translations, try to write above the line, if you're writing out in hand, write above the line what you're reading, and try to give like a what we call a wooden translation above the Hebrew words. A wooden translation means you're translating it as directly as you can into what a dictionary would tell you. But that's not a good translation. That's never a good translation. That's a first step in a translation. A translation seeks to try to render a story or a bit of information from a certain language into another language in a way that a speaker of that second language would understand. So you have to try to work it into English. So try to smooth it out. Right? So they show you a little bit at the bottom of page 80 about how to smooth these things out into English. And just understand that Hebrew is not English written in different letters. Hebrew is its own language, its own way of seeing the world. So if you want to translate Hebrew into English or into any other language, you have to try to think a bit about how Hebrew works and then think about how your target language works, English or some other language. So in any event, that's a bit just about translating in general, but this will be something we work on for years here at seminary, so don't worry about having a hard time now. And I have included here on the screen a PDF of what's on the Moodle site, and this is just a kind of short version of what's in the Learning Biblical Hebrew workbook. But so notice here, Joseph is hated by his brothers. Right, we're going to start the Joseph story here. So it starts here. This is Genesis 37:1. This is slightly edited from the biblical text to make it fit with your level of learning so far. But here, I'll just start reading here. Yashav, Yaakov, Be-Canaan. Yashav, Yaakov, Be-Canaan. Yashav Yaakov b'Ka'anan. Now, yashav is a verb, and if you don't know something, take a look at your vocabulary list. So on page 81, in the middle column, on the very top, it says yashav. And then it tells you to sit, dwell. Now, to sit, dwell, that's the dictionary definition. When I test you on vocabulary, learn that definition. To sit, to dwell. But when you translate it, you're going to have to make it fit with, you're going to have to make it work with the language, right? So when it shows up as yashav in a story, that is the third masculine singular call perfect version of the verb. Now, I know that doesn't mean much to you right now. We'll learn more about verbs later. But what you need to know is if there's nothing added to the beginning and nothing added to the end of this verb, then that means that it's a perfect verb, and know that it describes a past action that a single man did. So Jacob is the subject, right? Remember, we have verbs and then subjects in Hebrew. So our verb comes first. To sit, Jacob, in Canaan. Yashav has no beginning, and nothing's been added to the front, and then nothing's been added to the end. So it's Jacob sat in Canaan. Now, this is one of those things about translation. You have to change it a little bit, right? So in Hebrew, the verb sit can mean metaphorically to dwell somewhere. Jacob's seat was in Canaan, right? Jacob sat in Canaan. Really, it means he lived in Canaan. That's where he called his home. So Jacob lived in Canaan. Now, literally, it says he sat, Jacob, in Canaan. But remember, the subject comes after the verb. So we're going to read it in English as Jacob dwelled in Canaan. Now, our second verse is a little bit longer, right? That's a good first verse right there. 3 words, 2 names. We're doing well. Here's a preposition here, ba, right? Ba means in. That's part of your vocabulary list. In, on, or with. You can try any of those. Just try in at first with ba. Notice that ba sticks on to the name Canaan. Canaan means Canaan, right? It's just the name. So Jacob dwelt in Canaan. So verse 2 starts with va Yosef va ha'achim Shamaru et hatzon leYaakov vayavo Yosef el Yaakov b'davar ra al ha'achim. These 2 dots here, we saw that at the end of verse 1. These 2 dots means the end of a verse. That's an ancient Hebrew symbol for a period, end of a line, right? End of a sentence. So Jacob lived in Canaan. Was our first verse. Our second verse, va, which means and, that's our conjunction. Va Yosef, and they're going to give you that name. Va Yosef and Joseph. Now remember our Hebrew word order. If a subject comes first before the verb, that means they're trying to show you something or tell you something. Now Joseph, or then Joseph, it's highlighting Joseph as a character right here. And then va ha'achim, and the achim, va means and, ha means the. It should be hey patak dagesh, but this is an aleph here, so it's going to reject that dagesh, and we have compensatory lengthening. Va, ha means and the, and then achim. Achim. Now you don't maybe don't recognize that yet, but look at your im ending. That's a plural ending, so you're left with ach. Now if you look up in your vocabulary for chapter 4 on page 81, the first one there is ach means brother, plural achim. V'achim, and the brothers. You might just say Joseph and his brothers, right? That's probably what this means. But Joseph and the brothers, Shamaru. Remember we said that u ending, that's a verb ending. We've got our 3 letters in our root here, shamar, Do you remember that verb shamar? We talked about that a little bit, but it's also the last word in your grammar list. Shamar, which means to keep or guard. Now, if you're wondering about that ending there, underneath shamar in your vocabulary list, there's those little endings there, right? That's for like feminine, dual, plural, and so on. You can add next to that, you can write there and make a little cheat sheet for some of these endings. That oo ending means they. This is a perfect ending, and it's the plural ending. So it'd be like they kept, they guarded, they watched over. So now Joseph and the brothers watched or kept, and then our next word is et, and then we have a makef, that's our little dash there. Et, that's our marker of our direct object marker, right? It doesn't mean anything. It just tells you what did they watch, what's coming up. Et, what comes after this, that's what they're watching. Ha-tzon, notice, hey patak dagesh, that is our definite article. So what did they watch? Joseph and the brothers watched the tzon. You can look that up in your glossary if you want. You can look that up in your vocabulary list. It's in the middle column. Notice it's alphabetic, so it's tzadeh, which comes after ayin before kof. But here it says flock, right? The flock. And Joseph and his brothers kept or guarded or watched the flock. Le Yaakov. Le Yaakov. This says PN under here. It's just telling you it's a name. Does Yaakov sound like something? You translated that earlier. They gave that to you earlier. Yaakov, that's Jacob. But we have a lamed stuck on the front here. So you can look at your vocabulary list and notice that in that middle column, there's just a lamed with a schwa underneath it. And that means to or towards. There's a little A note. Go down to the bottom of the page. It says the prepositions b and la are attached to the front of words. That's just something we'll talk about in more detail later, but just know that exists, and that's a useful thing to know. And that this is often used to mean possession. So the flock to Jacob or of Jacob. We might even say Jacob's flock. So now Joseph and the brothers kept or guarded the flock for Jacob or to Jacob or of Jacob, Jacob's flock. And then here we have vayavo. Remember vaya? If you check out the 4th video about chapter 4, we have some really brief instructions about verbs, but vaya is the storytelling verb form. It's called the vav consecutive. Vaya. So vayavo. Vo is our real verb here. And they've given you something underneath here. Remember we talked a little bit about weak roots. You have some letters that just go away. Well, guess what? The middle vav here. There are a lot of very common verbs that have a middle vav and it just disappears. But thank goodness that Coutts and Joesberger, they'll always give you those until we get to the very last week of class when we talk about these weak verbs. But before then, you'll just get to know them very well. I like this way of learning weak verbs because they're common and they follow distinctive patterns, but you can just see them again and again and then eventually learn them that way. So, vayavo, vo means to go. It means to go. You look at your vocabulary. It's in your vocabulary list. Bo, to go in or come. Usually it means it's a verb of entering. It can sometimes mean to go. It usually doesn't mean go away from somewhere. It means to come in somewhere, to enter someplace. So vayavo Yosef. Remember the subject comes after the verb. So and Joseph came in. And then El Yaakov. El, if you want to look that up, that's a preposition. That means it's like shows you how something relates either in space or time to something else. So Joseph came in. El means to Yaakov, Jacob. And Joseph came in to Jacob. Davar. Ra. So ba means in, on, or with. So he came to Jacob in a word or on a word. That would be a strange way for Jacob to come in, or maybe with a word. That makes more sense. See, this is how you translate prepositions. You have a bunch of different preposition meaning a word like bait or la or L. Words that kind of are like in, on, with, next to, the words that relate one thing to another. We'll talk about these in more detail in a future lesson. But just for now, B and L and L, you're just going to be trying to relate things. So B, davar, with a word, and then ra, meaning bad. With a bad word. And then al, which is another one of these preposition words, one of these words that relates one thing to another thing. And you can see it means on, over, against, or concerning. It's in your vocabulary. So concerning or against, ha'achim. We saw that up here, right? Same exact word. The brothers. So now we can translate this whole sentence. Now Joseph and his brothers were watching the flock for Jacob. And Joseph came in to Jacob with a bad word against his brothers, or against the brothers. So do you see how the story is starting out here, right? Joseph is coming in with a bad report. Yaakov, now Jacob. I'm saying now because remember when you have a subject come before the verb, here's the verb next to love. When you have a subject come before the verb, it's like breaking a bit of the word order. So again, we're introducing a lot of characters. It's the beginning of a story. We're introducing a lot of characters. We're introducing a lot of important pieces of information for the story. So there'll be a lot of this breaking of typical word order. Once the story starts going, then you'll see more and more of the verb coming first and then the subject. So now Jacob, ahav, loved. Ahav, if you look it up in our vocabulary, you'll see it's not actually in our vocabulary. If you look it up in the glossary in the end, you'll be able to find it, but also they gloss it for you. This is a really important word because it doesn't just mean a heartfelt emotion of love. It can mean being bound to someone by fidelity, covenant loyalty. It can mean you made an agreement with someone. So to be faithful to that. So to love. Now Jacob loved et Yosef. Here's the object. Jacob loved Joseph. Now, this is, he's loving him more than the brothers. It's interesting here, right? Okay, so this is just a brief introduction to get you kind of started here. And hopefully you can continue this pattern. Now, translate as much as you can. Spend about 3 hours is my suggestion, or maybe this week you could spend 2. You can do a little bit less this week, but you can work collaboratively with other folks. Feel free to reach out to your preceptors or try to do some of this work in precept as well in your meetings with the teaching team, because that might be helpful for you as well. So I hope this has been a helpful beginning to translating. Just know that translating is always a messy business, but it can be really fun as well. So try to lean into the fun part and let the messiness kind of slip by you, and try to sink your teeth into the story. All right. Hope you all have a blessed time translating.